Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast. David Breakspear spent 4 decades trapped in the revolving doors of crisis and crime, along with everything that entailed. In 2017, he was released from his 9th and final custodial sentence, and since then he's been using his lived experience to advocate for reform. Hi David, nice to meet you.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon.
Good to see you again, David. Thanks so
And
much for joining us. So, David, you work for an organisation called Revolving Doors. Could you tell us a bit about the work of Revolving Doors and what your role is in the organisation?
Yeah, fine. I'm a volunteer there, paid volunteer. Revolving Doors have been going since 1993. So it's our 30th this month, funny enough, it's our 30th anniversary. So great timing speaking to me. And really they were kind of more about research. So they were looking into the reasons why people get caught up in the revolving doors of crisis and crime. And they started to understand the importance of lived experience and the involvement of people with lived experience. And in 2000, I hope I get these dates right, in 2008, they set up their first lived experience forum. And since then, it's been the norm, if you like. My role there is I'm a member of I'm a member of the lived experience team, and I'm also a peer mentor there on part of the health and justice side that we do with the NHS. We speak to companies such as MOJ, probation, NHS health and justice. I suppose, we speak, I suppose the best way to explain it is that revolving doors provide a platform for people with lived experience to speak truth to power. We've been involved in several projects, or I've been involved in several projects since I've been part of Revolving Doors. They've released with the MOJ, neurodiversity in the criminal justice system with the MOJ. We helped with the 3-year reducing reoffending plans with probation. But I think one of my kind of, I don't want to say proudest, but something I've really enjoyed doing with them is on a program called Reconnect, which I know you're going to mention, so I won't say too much about that. But being in a position to be able to, if you like, take ownership of my experience and to use it to influence change, it's about turning all of those negatives into a positive.
I really like the way you summed that up, actually, David, in terms of creating something that's purposeful and has meaning out of the experiences that you have, so that they're not kind of like just a waste of life in somehow. How did you come to get involved with them? Were they looking for people to join them, or did someone connect you with them?
Yeah, it's quite a story, actually. Well, not quite a story, it's not a short story, but a friend of mine, Jermaine Davis, and I'll explain why in a minute, but he was a campaigner for changes to the criminal justice system, and me and Jermaine met on social media, and then he mentioned Revolving Doors to me. He said, have you ever heard of Revolving Doors? And so I got in contact with Revolving Doors. I spoke to Andy Williams, the involvement manager, and I loved what it was that we were discussing. I loved what they were about. I love what they do. Obviously, Jermaine already spoke to me, and I immediately said, yep, I want in. I want in, and they allowed me to join. Sadly, a year later, Jermaine took his own life. So I kind of have a bit more of an emotional attachment to Revolving Doors than I would under normal circumstances.
Thank you. I'm sorry to hear that's happened in such a way. But
it was quite sad at the time. It's still sad now. Sorry, sad, upsetting at the time. One good thing that come out of it was Jermaine received a lot of dedications within some of the work we were doing. I mentioned the probation work, but we also done some work with Russell Webster on something called peer volunteers, and basically it was a guide for organisations who accept volunteers, who accept people with lived experience as volunteers, and it's basically a how-to guide, if you like, and how to get the best practices in. And he received a dedication in that as well. But I mean, whenever I do any work with Revolving Doors, I kind of feel like Jermaine's there with me. And I don't want to sound egotistical, but I kind of speak. No, I don't want to say I'll speak for him, because I don't. But I get his words in my head as well. Do you know what I mean? It's like something that he felt very strongly about was the use of language, and that's something I advocate for as well. That the system uses the right sort of language, like you mentioned in your introduction in the email you sent to me. I thought that paragraph was fantastic, and I thought, yes, I so can't wait to speak to these. So yeah, I mean, it's yeah, as I say, it just gives me that little bit more of emotional attachment, and I can't think of the right words to say about it really, but he's there on my shoulder every time I'm doing stuff with Revolving Doors. It's the best way to say it, I suppose.
Thank you. So moving on to the work of Revolving Doors, and obviously your background's really relevant to this. I wondered if you could share a bit about what it's like waiting to get out of prison and know that you have nowhere to go.
Something I say regularly is that sometimes it's not the prison sentence itself that's difficult, it's getting out that's different. It's that difficult. It's that transition from prison to society that can be really difficult. And in the past, I have come out of prison with, if you like, nowhere to go, no support, nothing around me. And it is difficult. It's extremely difficult, especially if you like, in prison, your intentions, you've got good intentions, you're going to turn your life around. You do all the work that you need to do in prison to change your life, and then you come out of prison and you're just dropped. And it does make that prison release less of an event than it should be. I mean, being released from prison should be an incredible event, but when you've got nothing and nowhere to go, you don't want to get out. It's as simple as that. You don't want to get out.
Doesn't set people up very well, does it, for how the rest of their freedoms going to go?
No, it doesn't. And of course, there's also the issue of people taking their own life shortly after coming out of prison as well, and that is because of that stress, if you like, of starting again, I suppose. And if you're doing it with no support, if you're doing it with no one around you, I mean, it's difficult as it is anyway, because of the stigma and discrimination that comes from society to prison leavers. But to do it with nothing, it's so difficult, so difficult.
Yeah, it sounds a really overwhelming and, lonely and overwhelming position to be in, really, at that point, especially if you've been in for a long time and society changes.
Yeah, it can be, and yeah, well, yeah, basically.
What other challenges do people getting out of prison face after a long sentence?
Well, like you mentioned, the society changes. When you're in, you kind of think that society stays on hold while you're away, and then you come out and you just see all these changes. I mean, for me, social media wasn't really a thing, and then come out and it's everywhere sort of thing. And I had to get used to using social media and things like that. I mean, although I've spent a lot of time in prison over a long period of time, I think the longest I spent in prison was 2 years behind the door, if you like, on one sentence. So mine is all built up, but how someone would feel after 10, 15, 20 years, I cannot imagine. I mean, I know how difficult it is to get out of prison and sort of sort yourself out after, as I say, 2 years, 18 months, whatever those sentences were. So how someone does it after 10, 15 years, I just don't know. I really don't know. Mental toughness and resilience, it's got to be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really hard to comprehend what it, just thinking about how much society's changed with technology, for instance. If you went to prison sort of 15 or 20 years ago, how, society is a very different place. But
smartphones.
Yes, exactly.
Funny enough, what my own experience, what had changed on this one was the way that the DWP worked. And before, a case of you go in, you sit down with someone, you speak to them and all of that. And I'd gone to the office and they give me a bit of paper and said, oh, you've got to fill that out. And I, well, no, I need to sit down and this is how I done it. And it was security. Within a minute, there were 6 security guards around me and I'm being labelled as potentially violent because I'm arguing with these, because I didn't understand it. I just didn't understand it. Fortunately, I walked away from that situation, but that could have gone completely the opposite direction and I'd have found myself back in prison again.
Well, anxiety doesn't bring out the best in many of us, does it? The more stressed people are, people do become anyone can become irritable and what have you when they feel stressed. But I had a little chuckle when you said about social media, because actually you're somebody who's really found your voice on social media. I think you post a lot, and on LinkedIn you post a lot and really kind of like thought-provoking posts. So certainly it seems like something that you have really found your way with.
Well, I had a bit of a, if you like, a training ground with Facebook. When I first come out of prison, I knew that I wanted to do this type of work, but I had to go through approved premises first. My index offence was violence. It was a robbery. So I was a mapper. And so I had to go through approved premises, which is probation bail hostel for want of another name. And I then come out of the AP and went into supported accommodation. So I was sort of not trapped, but I was in this kind of chasm, if you like, of going nowhere. And so I've got an interest in organised crime that stems back from many years ago. So I joined Facebook and I started to join organised crimes groups and started to use, if you like, my knowledge about organised crime, the mafia, that sort of thing, American mafia, Sicilian mafia, and built up how to kind of utilize social media to get a message across, if you like, in organised crime. And then I started to use Twitter, or X as it's now known, which I found to be extremely poisonous. So I gave both of those up. I tried LinkedIn a couple of times before it got kicked off because I wasn't using it the right way. And it was third time lucky. And since then, I think that was just before lockdown that I started using LinkedIn. And apart from Instagram, which is, if you like, my playground, it's the only site I now use. And I've been extremely surprised and shocked at how I've been received on such a professional platform. I was really unsure as to how it was going to go. I thought, I'm going to get attacked left, right and centre. What are you doing on here? This is a professional site. But it hasn't been like that at all. And yeah, it's just incredible. Apps. I mean, to be honest, for want of another phrase, I'm nobody. I'm not anybody. I'm someone, like David mentioned, stuck in the revolving doors of crisis and crime for almost 4 decades. And there I am trying to voice my opinions and messages on this massive professional platform. And I've been received so well. It's just, I still find it amazing today. And as I say, it's 3 years that I've been doing it on there now.
Thank you, David. You've given us some extraordinary insights already. Thanks very much for that. But you know how sometimes when you're saying something aloud, it takes on a different meaning or a different power of meaning. So I found that when reading out the brief introduction at the beginning, and these phrases, 4 decades, that's 40 years, and your 9th custodial sentence, and it made quite an impact on me, because I couldn't help thinking that must be extraordinarily disruptive to you and to your life and your relationships. Is that how you found it? And how have you now kind of settled into this smooth path that you found?
Yeah, it has been, if you like, I spent most of my life surviving life. Couldn't hold down a job, not very great at relationships and holding down relationships. I was committing crime. Why would someone want to be with someone that's committing crime? I had an early marriage that broke down early as well, in my 20s. My mum died in the 20s as well. So all of those sort of things really did have an impact on me kind of over the years, but I've never really had much of a high self-esteem of myself, self-worth. I didn't think of myself. I always called myself scum, and I accepted it as well. So one of the things that I did do was change the way that I spoke to myself, because I think how you speak to yourself is more important than how you speak to other people. And during my stints in prison, as I got older and more mature, I started getting involved in a lot more, if you like, citizenship work, so mentoring. I began in 2005, March 2005, with Shannon Trust, who are a charity who teach people in prison who can read, train people in prison who can read to teach people in prison who can't. And that really did start to open my eyes to the people around me, because I thought, yeah, I suppose it was right. I thought I was quite unique, not unique as in great, but unique as in my own perspective, that the life I was leading was kind of abused at a young age, excluded from school, all of that sort of stuff. And then I started to realize how common it was amongst my peers. Off the back of becoming a mentor for Shannon Trust, I then become a listener for the Samaritans. So that's kind of the same sort of thing as the mentoring, but you're kind of getting involved in people's innermost demons, if you like. And that again really did enhance what it was that I was already thinking. I started to learn more about myself through mentoring, through being a listener, than any offending behavior course or therapy could ever do. And I become a better person because of it. In prison, not out here. It didn't transition out. So I kind of had 2 characters. I had a character. I was David. I was a person in prison, and I was a different person out here. And then in 2010, I was diagnosed with several disorders, personality disorders, along with being ADHD. And although at the time, it was like, when I received those diagnoses, it wasn't a case of, oh, great, this is why, this is the reason, like, these are the excuses, blah, blah, blah. I saw them as reasons. And although at that time, I suppose I wasn't ready to take in everything that I'd been told, over the time, it slowly began to sink in. Having said that, decisions I'd taken, choices I made, I found myself in 2015 with nothing. I was disengaged from my own children, my grandchildren, my family, my friends. I was on the streets, homeless, heroin, crack, amphetamine, cannabis, alcohol. I was in a bad way. And I made a choice. Did I want to carry on living like that? Or do I want a different life? To be honest, at first it was, well, do I want to live or die? And I chose to live, obviously. But I didn't want to live like that anymore. And I knew the only place that I could go to sort myself out was prison. And I committed a crime that I knew would obviously get me sent back to prison to get caught. I committed the crime, got caught, got 3 years, 9 months. And I wanted to use that time to turn my life around, to kind of take all of my experience, all of my knowledge, everything I knew about me, everything I knew who I could be in prison as well, to try and transfer that person out here. At first I was all right. I had great intentions, but then I messed up. I got involved in spice in prison, and I was 6-7 months into my sentence, and it all come crumbling down. Fortunately, I was in Norwich prison at the time. There's 3 parts to Norwich prison. There's a DCAT part, which is HMP Britannia House. You've got the CCAT part, which is the old YOI, known as F&G wing. And then you had the main prison, which was the local BCAT. And I was on F&G at the time. And the day that I got nicked, if you like, was the same day I received my DCAT. So I went from an enhanced DCAT prisoner to going back to BCAT conditions on basic for 5 weeks. And for the first couple of days, I had the I spat my dummy out. That was it. I've had enough. That's it. This is my life and now, sort of thing. And then an officer from Safer Custody come and spoke to me for about an hour in my cell. And we just talked things through, and the prison gave me another chance. I stayed in the BCAT part, finished my 5 weeks basic, and then shortly afterwards I got put on to M wing, which was, it's not an enhanced wing, but it was a slightly laid back, more calm, relaxed wing. It's only 40 people. It's basically 2 port cabins on top of each other. And there was only 20 on each landing, so there was a maximum of 40 people on there. And it was people on there that wanted to do their prison sentence the right way. So I had a lot of people around me that were egging me on and motivating me and influencing me, and I was influencing them and motivating them. We bounced off of each other. And I was released on the 9th of June 2017. I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how I was going to do it. I knew that I wanted, because I'd used my lived experience in prison. I knew how it made me feel in helping others. And as I say, I had to go through 3 months of an approved premise. Then I got caught up in, or trapped in, supported accommodation because I couldn't move on. It was the council wouldn't house me. Then I tried to go private with council. I can't remember the name of the scheme, but they help pay the deposit to the landlord. I can't remember the name of the scheme. So I sorted all that out and then started looking at properties, but no one would touch me because I had a criminal record. And fortunately, eventually, I met someone who coincidentally lived in I was still in Norwich at the time, and she lived in my old home county of Kent. We got talking and ended up moving in together. And that's been the case ever since. And so, but the biggest thing coming out of prison was having support. There's an organisation called Future Projects up in Norwich. They'd come in to do what's known as a radio resettlement show, and for people that are going to be released in the next 6 weeks in the Norwich area. I thought, oh, I like a bit of that. That sounds good, because I knew that I needed something at the other side of the gate just to give me that support, to give me that platform that I could build from. Because as I mentioned earlier, coming out of prison could be a lot more difficult than the actual prison sentence itself, and I knew I needed help. I'm not I wasn't mentally strong at that point, and I knew that there could be some areas that you have to do, like probation and DWP and all those sort of things, that could be high risk situations for me where I'd make a mistake and I'd just fall apart and whatever. So they really did help me with those type of things. And yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, I done a piece in their local paper up there, up in Norwich, the Evening Post, about future, because they really did give me the platform so that I could have a future. And since then, it's just been a case of just building and building and building and building. But I had that platform to build from. When you come out of prison, you have a negative. Like I said, if there's nothing or no one, you've got no chance. I mean, I take my hat off to anyone that comes out of prison that doesn't have support, doesn't have a support network around them, that can change their life around outside of prison. Big respect to them. I couldn't do that. I knew I couldn't do that. I got the support around me, and the supported accommodation I was in, the support there was great as well. So I had kind of a double-barreled form of support, and slowly pulled away from them. And now my partner, my children, my grandchildren, my close family, that's my kind of support network now, along with the guys and girls at Revolving Doors.
Thank you for that very powerful description there, David. It's made me think of a lot of things. I mean, I'm very familiar, as I'm sure Naomi is, of many people who have followed a similar kind of path in prison, embarking upon these citizen projects, as you described it. So people who become very skillful in prison have opportunity to use their relationships with others and their intelligence. But the big breach comes when they're leaving prison. And that seems to be the area of great challenge. I mean, we're speaking to someone, must be over a year ago now, who, funnily enough, was also called David, who was describing a similar pattern to you, David, of being in and out. And then he made a decision, like you did. And the way that he managed it was that he joined in everything. He joined in anything that was going that he could do.
I was known as David and his many coloured T-shirts, because obviously whatever roles you cover in prison, you get the T-shirt. So with the listeners, it was green. With Shannon Trust, it was red. I can't think of them all now. With Prisoner Rep, it was purple. I was Foreign National Rep. I threw myself into it. But you do in prison. If someone's a mentor, you'll find they're not just a mentor for one thing, they're a mentor for 4 or 5 different things. And I was education on my last sentence. Well, I've been education mentor a couple of times in jail. But this last one, I spent 16 months, I think it was, as education mentor. And that was some of the most, just incredible times being in there. And seeing people not being able to read, then go on to kind of start studying for an access module before doing a degree. And that might sound dramatic, but that happens. Because what I found with Shannon Trust, as a Shannon Trust mentor, was it wasn't so much that people couldn't or struggled to read, it was they didn't have the confidence because of the way that they've been treated over the years and the way they felt about themselves. And once you break through that, off they go. And learning, it becomes addictive. It really does become addictive. Succeeding, achieving, it's in prison, it becomes addictive because it's a positive that doesn't exist, if you like, in prison. So once you start achieving, it's just like, I want more, I want more, I want more. And yeah, that's what I did.
Excellent. So moving on, you mentioned Reconnect earlier on. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
I certainly can indeed. Reconnect is a initiative from NHS Health and Justice. It's based on Lord Keith Bradley's report. Ironically, coincidentally, it's called the Bradley Report in 2009. And on the back of the Bradley Report, what was created was something known as liaison and diversion. And liaison diversions, basically, they work in police stations, they work in courts, And at the beginning, it was all about mental health. It was about ensuring that people were receiving the right mental health services, the right mental health support. And if not, they would liaise with them and introduce these other support agencies to them, and hopefully divert people away from the criminal justice system at the first instance. But obviously, it doesn't work for everybody, and you've got people in prison that have disengaged from health services for whatever reason. They might not have even engaged at all. So on the back of that, on the back of liaison and diversion, Reconnect was created. And since 2019, the NHS Health and Justice come to Revolving Doors and said, look, we've got this idea. What do you think? And from day one, Revolving Doors have been working with NHS Health and Justice on developing the Reconnect program. It's live. It went live in 2019. As I say, we've been working with them from day one on developing and continual development of Reconnect. It's now, I believe, 84% coverage of England, obviously NHS England, so they only cover England, and hoping to have 100% coverage by spring next year. And all it really is, for want of a better phrase, I like using them words, is a hand-holding service. It's about being met, people coming out of prison and having nothing. You get met in prison, someone speaks to you, so that relationship is built before someone comes out of prison, because there's nothing worse than being met at the gate by someone you don't know. So it's always good to build up that relationship before release. And it's just someone that's there with you to support you into whatever it is that you requested. I mean, it can be something as simple as signing up for a GP registration. It can be that, or it could be mental health issues that someone has. So it's just, as I say, it's that hand-holding service to support people into going into the services that they need to address their needs. And a lot of the support workers appears they're people with lived experience. And one thing that we found is that people who have gone through a Reconnect program, come out successfully the other side, are coming back into Reconnect as peer workers. And it's just I love it. I absolutely adore. I mean, I spent 2.5 years myself representing the lived experience team at the board level of NHS Health and Justice. That's now other people now cover that role, but I'm on something now called Enhanced Reconnect, which is Reconnect but enhanced. But it's for more sort of, if you like, I hate this word complex, but I can't think of a better word, but it's for more complex needs, for people that are higher risk. So you're looking at the National Security Directive, so people that have been convicted of terrorist events, incidents, and then underneath those you've got people with extremist links, and then underneath those you've got serious violence and sexual offences and things like that. Because at the end of the day, everyone has a right to have their health needs met, regardless of what someone's in prison for. We're humans, and there's no coincidence that the word humanity has human in it. So yeah, but I love Reconnect. I really do. I mean, I've seen how successful it can be. This year we've done a couple of site visits. I've done 2 face-to-face and 4 online. And it's just, one thing that I get to see is the passion behind the people behind Reconnect, the commitment. It's just such a wonderful thing to see, because at the end of the day, yes, people commit crime, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're criminals. It just means that they've got unmet needs that need addressing but haven't been for whatever reason. And a lot of that comes down to health. And if we can support people into getting their health needs met, the chances are they won't be reoffending, or hopefully with liaison and diversion, offending.
When you were talking about enhanced reconnect, David, I was struck by the amount of trust and confidence that people must have in your skills and ability to do that, to perform that role, actually. And thinking, quite often when people have spent a lot of time in prison, they haven't had that much experience of people having faith in their abilities. And I just wondered what that was like for you to know that people have got that confidence in you.
Well, in prison, we spoke about Shannon Trust, we spoke about listeners and other types of mentoring roles. I mean, I think there's something like 40 different mentoring roles in prison. So in prison, you're used to working with people with lived experience, because you don't need to explain things to someone with lived experience. Do you know what I mean? You just, they know it, they get it, they understand it. You can look. And you just get it. You just know what someone's thinking, not perhaps what they're thinking, but what they're going through, the kind of struggles they may be facing, those sort of things. But for me, I mean, I'm going to sing the praises of the NHS Health and Justice here, because they so value the opinion of people with lived experience. And they are, what's the word on it? They are sort of the head trumpeters and advocates for the people who lived the experience. I mean, the way that they've made, I've mentioned Lord Keith Bradley. It's like, no, call me Keith. It's so down to earth. And all of the staff within the NHS Health and Justice, I mean, Kate Davis, she's the head of NHS Health and Justice. I took part in an event, co-chaired the event with Kate and with Keith Bradley, Lord Keith Bradley, last year. And Kate sent me some flowers, the only woman to ever send me flowers. And when people value like that, it just, well, it adds to how you feel about yourself. It adds to that self-esteem. It adds to that mental toughness. It adds to that resilience, that you've got people around you that actually value your lived experience. Lived experience that, I don't know, a lot of the public will look at and just turn their noses up. Do you know what I mean? Because of that stigma and discrimination that comes with having a criminal record. But the NHS Health and Justice, for me, I mean, the NHS, they're an absolute godsend in this country. And NHS Health and Justice are just an incredible set of people. They didn't pay me to say that either. They don't even know I'm on a podcast. So, and they know who they are, so I don't need to name them. But well, Kate, Liz, Jake, Kate, and Nikki, they're the ones. But they're just awesome.
Thank you. That's a good shout out for them. And from what you're saying, it's clear that you very much believe in peer support. And your other terms for that are things like lived experience, experts by experience, that kind of thing. You obviously believe in that very strongly.
I am, David, because I've seen it for myself. Again, I mentioned Shannon Trust. This is all of that stuff that goes on in prison. That's all. I dread to think what the prison system would look like without that type of work going on. I mean, the listeners provide support to people 24/7. Shannon Trust help people to read, and for me, reading is it's very difficult for me to understand because I can read, but what I do know is how difficult prison can be if you can't. You can't fill out a menu, so you have to rely on someone. You can't do your canteen, you have to rely on someone. You can't read your own letters, you have to rely on someone. And some of those letters are quite personal. And some of those letters as well were legal. So you're going to have people looking into kind of your legal stuff as well. Being able to read signs, all things like that. I mean, the difference that being able to read in prison and the independence that gives you is massive. And that's off the back of other people, peers, your neighbour in prison. It's things like that. Listeners are saving people's lives. As we're sitting here now, there could be a listener call going on in prison where someone's life's just been saved because they've been able to asked to speak to somebody, someone with lived experience that they know are not going to judge them, they know that's in the same boat as them, and they save their life just by talking.
Thank you. So shifting the direction of the gaze slightly, because a lot of people in prison are very mistrustful of people in authority, aren't they? Can you say something about why that is and how it...
Yeah, I can. Yeah, because you've been let down so many times, David. That's the thing as well. I mean, if you think that a lot of people in prison have had very disruptive childhoods, where adults around them who are there to support, love and help them have let them down. And if you're being let down by those around you you love, that should be there for you and let you down, when it's a stranger sort of that's in that position, then you're not going to trust a stranger because you've been let down by all these adults before. So yeah, I mean, that's what really it comes down to, is that being let down so many times before by these people that are supposed to be there to protect you.
What changed it for you personally?
Change what, David?
You changed your attitude towards authority.
Do you know what? In prison, I never really had an issue. As I say, I always got on well in prison. I didn't have an issue. All right, back in the early days, detention centre and youth custody, that was hard. And some of the staff were bullies. There's no other word for it. They went out of their way to cause trouble. But obviously within the adult male estate, yet there's still some of those officers about, very, very much in the minority. But I never really had an issue with prison officers. It was, they were that was prison become my home. It become my comfort zone. So it was out here where I did have issues with trust. I'm not saying that I've got past those issues. I mean, having said that, I respect, I suppose. Do you know what? At the end of the day, I grew up and stopped thinking the world owed me a favour. That really is what the case is, isn't that? Everyone's got a story to tell. Everyone's got a job they have to do. So it's not so much the person, it's the title, if you like, that was mistrusting. It was the job that was mistrusting. It wasn't the individual themselves. And I've learned over the years, I mean, I hated, I don't mind saying it, I hated the police. I absolutely hated them. And tomorrow I'm going to be on a podcast with two police officers who invited me on. Because again, yeah, see, the thing is, you've got all of this mist in front of your eyes when you survive in life. And once you remove that mist, you start to view life differently as well. And when you start thinking better about yourself, you start thinking better about other people. It's very difficult to think good of someone when you're not good yourself, if you like, for want of a better phrase.
So when you're working alongside someone, David, how do you go about helping them see their way through that mist and overcome their resentment?
Listen, that's what it is. As a mentor, it's not about showing people what you did. It's about showing them what they can do. And you do that through talking, asking questions, the right questions. It's like if schools started asking the question, what's happened to you, rather than what's wrong with you, we might find that there'd be less people in the criminal justice system. And that's all it is. There's no secret behind it. It's lending someone a shoulder, believing in someone, listening to someone. That's what it comes down to. And that's what I found for myself. On my last sentence, my Deb's, her name is, curriculum manager, who I was education mentor for, she had so much belief in me that I could only begin believing in myself. She really did unlock a talent in me that I didn't know I had. And you just, again, it's like being able to read. Once you begin, off you go. Once you remove that, off you go. and you just speak to people in the right way. You ask the right questions. You don't tell them what to do. You don't tell them how their life is. You ask them how their life is. You ask them, what is it you enjoy doing? What do you get most pleasure out of? And one of the things that I used to do with Shannon Trust, I used to ask people, what's your favorite thing? What do you enjoy doing most? An example is one guy, I was helping him with his maths as well. And I said to him, what's your favorite sport? What sport do you? And he loved golf. And I said, golf is all about maths. He said, no, it's not. No, it's not. I said, it is. And we started building up his maths, his strengths in maths based on golf, because he was interested in golf. So therefore, it's a lot easier to embed the math into something he's interested in rather than just ram math down his throat.
Thank you. Great description.
So moving on, you referred a couple of times to approved premises, David, or probational hostels. What's it like living in one? People often sound quite frightened about moving there when they're in prison.
Well, I was very anti. I'd been to APs before and recalled every time because I couldn't handle them. APs, approved premises, they're mixed residents. So you've got people that were convicted of sort of sex offensive crimes in there against anybody, so women, children, whatever. And you've also got people like for violent crimes, and mixing in this small area, whereas in prison we're separated, and you're not allowed to judge, if you like. You're not allowed to kind of argue. So it's a very, very difficult situation to be in. There's a lot of restrictions placed on you as well. It's quite ironic, really, because on your license, it does, or not on everyone's license, but it states that you're not allowed to hang around with criminal friends, and yet you're in a hostel full of people that have been in prison. Do you know what I mean? It's strange, and you're kind of stuck in there as well. You have to eat in there, you sleep in there, you wash in there, everything goes on in there. So if you don't go into an AP in the right frame of mind, if you look at it as it is, the chances are you fail. You've got to think of yourself. You've got to put yourself first. You've got to be selfish. And that's what I learned. I was going against them every single time. The same with probation. I was against them all the time, working against them, not complaining. If they said it was blue, I'd say it was grey. Do you know what I mean? Really was an anti-probation, anti-AP person. And this time around, it was like, look, if I want to get my life sorted out, I've got to do it. I have to do it. There's no if, buts, or maybes about it. I have to have the right attitude in this AP, otherwise I'm going to get recalled. And obviously I didn't get recalled, so I did have the right attitude, but they are extremely, extremely difficult. It's like, again, from my experience, my own personal experience, in prison, I was on medication that I could have in possession. It's known as in possession in prison. Yet when I got to the hostel, after 2 years of prison, I'm being told that I have to hand my medication in and start going into insight. Insight means that you have to take your medication in front of them. And that, for me, it's just more control, more control, more control. It's like I had my control in prison, but I've come out and now I've got to hand my control over to you. It's being in an AP for me is just as hard, if not harder, than being in prison. Harder than being in an open prison for me, and that was where I struggled and why I kind of kept getting recalled back to prison, because I couldn't handle life in an AP. I couldn't handle, because you're out, you're free, but you're not. It's a really bizarre sense of freedom that you have. Yeah, it's a completely different mindset. In my opinion, it's a completely different mindset that you have to take in there than any other thing to do in a criminal justice system.
What does the system do to make these environments feel more supportive, give people a better place to land when they leave prison? Is there anything you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, I understand why we have the need for APs, and especially for people that are convicted of sex offences, we don't want people like that going underground and being lost, um, especially if they're high risk. But yeah, for me, it's for a start, I believe that we should be separated like we are in prison, because that, as I say, that it's very difficult. You can imagine, I don't know if you can, but someone that has a history of being abused, and you're now sitting there eating your dinner with people that abuse children. It's extremely difficult when you're trying to turn your life around. You've got all this extra pressure on you to behave, and in prison. Sorry to say, but if you're on general population and you know someone is a sex offender or something like that, it's a kind of duty that you have to do something violent towards them in prison. It's otherwise you'll just get tarred with the same brush. Why didn't you do anything then? What you in? Do you know what I mean? That was the sort of atmosphere that you have to kind of deal with. So when you come out of prison and you get put in an AP and we're not separated, it's really difficult. So for me, we need to have separate ones. And again, I understand why they're there. Because they're there to make sure that you kind of reintegrate back into society in the right way. And people do need to be reintegrated back in. If you've done 20 years in prison, come out and get put on your own in a flat, you're going to fail. Not everyone, perhaps, but the chances are you're going to fail. So I totally understand why they're there. The principle is spot on. It's the practices that they need to change. And also they need to give people, I mean, that this kind of probation becoming so risk averse that you can't breathe. Probation needs to take a little bit of a step back, if you like, but they won't because they're too scared of anything happening. And I understand that, because it does happen. You get people, I can't remember the one, the recent lady who was raped and killed by someone that had been out of prison for a week, and he hadn't logged in with probation, all that sort of stuff. Something like that happens, they then become the face of everything. So everything then clamps down, everything shuts down under more conditions, under more restrictions. So they tar everyone with the same brush. Stop tarring everyone with the same brush. If one person does it, it doesn't mean to say that another 1,000 are going to do it. Do you know what I mean? It's treat people as individuals. Don't treat them as a high risk prisoner. Treat me, if you like, as David Breakspear, not as everything else that comes with it. But no, I haven't got all the answers for it, no. But yeah, for me, it's the practices that need to change.
It's an interesting point that you make about the, that tend, because we do see that, don't we? That if something goes wrong, then all of a sudden the restrictions are applied in a uniform way, and we don't notice all the times that it goes right.
Well, Daniel Khalif, he escaped. When he escaped, sorry, allegedly escaped. I don't know how it's allegedly, but there you go. 40 people were moved out of Wandsworth. People's rottles were being cancelled. People DCAT, they were getting sent back from DCAT. People's compassionate leave was being cancelled. Everything gets cancelled when one person messes up.
But just to pick up on that point about having a mixed population of people who've been convicted of sexual offences living alongside people who haven't. I mean, I did lead a service where we did have people working together with mixed backgrounds, but I think, that was perhaps the place to be able to work on that. And actually, once people are outside, maybe that becomes more challenging if people haven't already addressed those kind of difficulties, the cultural difficulties.
I was invited up to HMP Doncaster last year, and I was in one of the, I won't name too many areas, but I was in one of their work areas where all 43 prisoners, which is vulnerable prisoners, VPs, and people in prison from the same, from the general population, work together. And I was in this area and I really did not know any different. I didn't know who was in for what. You couldn't tell who was in for what. There was no one putting me one side saying, oh, you need to be careful of that person, you need to be careful of that person. So it can work, but you're right, Naomi, it needs to begin in now under slightly more, I can't think of the right words to use, they're under more sort of regimented control, I suppose is the best way to describe that. But when you come out, it's a completely different feeling. It's a completely different mindset that you have. It's like, no, we're separated. So if someone's used to that sort of situation in prison, they come out to live in an AP, they're going to find it a hell of a lot easier than someone that hasn't gone through that in prison.
So, David, one of the things that you've kind of like touched on was, I think you mentioned detention centres, and you've made me, and you've also spoke quite passionately about maybe if we asked young people what's happened rather than what's wrong with them. Do we criminalise our young people too soon? I mean, we have the lowest stage of criminal responsibility in Europe, don't we?
Yeah, 10. And yes, we do criminalise children too young. I mean, for me, the biggest area that we should focus on is the school to prison pipeline and school exclusions. Obviously, that's not to say that school exclusions primarily lead people in the criminal justice system, but it's the behaviour behind those school exclusions that do, because that behaviour gets left undressed. It gets left unmet. Children get punished rather than helped. I mean, being excluded from school, if you're a young child and you're excluded from school, you feel as if you're being excluded from society. And not only that, by being excluded from school, I think it was 2019, National Crime Agency suggested that 100% of children caught up in county lines had been excluded from school, and that school exclusion is a contributing factor to child criminal exploitation. Because if children are in school, they can't be exploited. Having said that, people now are being exploited in school to kind of get, if you like, soldiers involved in county lines. Yeah, I mean, for me, and when I was last in prison, 2017, just before I got out, the Institute of Public Policy, they estimated that at the time, I think there was 85,965 people in prison. 54,164 had been excluded from school. So it's a massive, massive problem. And once that, I mean, it's so much easier to support a child than it is to fix a broken man. It really is, because once you're in that criminal justice system, it's extremely, extremely difficult to get back out again. And everything becomes entrenched, like I was stuck in that system for years. And you'll find that people that are excluded from school who end up in prison go to prison 8, 9, 10 times, and around the age of 40, 45, like I was, until they're able to grasp life, if you like, and be able to turn their life around. It's such an important area. I mean, there's so much research available out there as well about the school to prison pipeline. Up in 2013, the University of Edinburgh, they were looking into the issues of the prisons in Scotland being overcrowded. And the director of the research turned around and said, the best way to deal with Scottish overcrowding is to stop the school to prison pipeline and school exclusions. It's such, it's that the evidence is screaming at us. And I always, prevention's better than cure. It really is. If we can support children, now I'm not saying that every child should be in school, because school isn't for everybody. But there are so many alternative provisions now, and SEND schools and things like that. There's so much alternative provision available that children shouldn't be left to be failing. They shouldn't be left to walk the streets. They shouldn't be left to be exploited by county line gangs.
Thank you, David. So you're also involved, well, you're involved with so many things. What is the Revolving Doors Neurodiversity Forum?
Well, basically, the Neurodiversity Forum is a a group of 6 members with lived experience, 6 members of the lived experience team who have identified as being neurodivergent. And since October 2021, along with other companies out there that were working with the Ministry of Justice, we've also been working with the Ministry of Justice on their neurodiversity in the criminal justice system program. And basically, again, it's about speaking truth to power. It's about speaking to policy makers and decision makers. It's about letting them listen to what, for me, what wasn't there. I mean, I can't help them into what was there because we didn't have anything around neurodiversity. So it's about what was missing in my life, those sort of things. And some of the stuff that's gone on, I mean, on the back of the neurodiversity in the criminal justice system report, you've now got neurodiversity support managers in prisons. And on the back of neurodiversity support managers in prisons, they've now got people in prison becoming neurodiversity champions. So you've got, again, it's like Shannon Trust, listeners, St. Giles, peer advisors, that sort of thing. It's people with lived experience in prison banging the drum now for people with neurodiversity. And we're starting to see changes. I mean, you've got HMP Park, which has a neurodiversity wing. You've got Pentonville now, which has a neurodiversity landing. It needs to be expanded and expanded so it's a national thing, not just a local thing. That's one of the biggest issues in the criminal justice system for me. Things happen in silos. If something's good going on in Cornwall, it should be just as good going on up in Newcastle. Yes, there are differences between the 2 counties, and those should be brought into it, but that's down to those individual counties to bring into it. There's no reason why we can't have a national policy, though.
Thank you. So we're getting towards the end of our conversation, David. So I mean, you said so many interesting things, but what struck me was that we've mentioned that the age of criminal responsibility is 10, and you've mentioned several times about hitting a stage in life. I'm not quite sure whether you meant around 30 or around 40, where you grew up. And I agree with that. I think we greatly underestimate the rate. No, we overestimate the rate at which we grow up.
Yeah, I think I think in the criminal justice system, in the male estate, for people who are caught up in the criminal justice system, the age of maturity is 29. I can't remember where that research has come from. It may be the MOJ themselves that have stipulated that, but I know it's it could even be higher than that. But yeah, but then the reasons for that is because of everything that's gone on before, excluded from school, care experience. I mean, there's so many different reasons why someone doesn't mature until later on in life. And I'm one of those people. You kind of learn from your own experiences. You start learning from your own lessons. And again, it doesn't happen with everyone. But I was quite fortunate that although I was kicked out of school, I still love to learn. I think it was Mark. Yeah, it was Mark Twain who said, "I didn't let school interfere with my education," and I very much resonate with that. In prison, learning, education, because that's what it's about. Prison, it's a learning and an education environment. You're learning something every day, and the more that you can sort of absorb that and then start to use it in your own mind for yourself, then that's when you start to turn your life around. That's when you start to grow up. That's when you start to see things from a different lens. And you start to realise, hold on a minute, this life ain't much of a life really going in and out of prison. I think it's time I changed. But that's why we need to grab people early, because once someone's caught up in that system, that doesn't happen until someone's 30, 35, 40. We need to make sure that as a child, they don't end up in the criminal justice system.
You've had a pretty difficult life, really. and you work now with people who've also been through very difficult and challenging times. How do you keep yourself well and refreshed in life, really?
By doing it. Do you know, there's no better feeling than giving back. I spent so long taking that once I began to give back, I started feeling better about myself. So again, that's what it comes down to. When it's about self-care, it's what I do. That's where I get that motivation, that passion, that will to live, if you like, by what I do. Having said that, I do take time for myself. I relax. I chill out. I have other people that I can offload to. Debriefing is something that's extremely important. I'm recently past training to become a lived experience influencer for the National Suicide Prevention Alliance. So we debrief a lot after that. They also provide support as well. It's Revolving Doors, Samaritans, who I'm a member of their lived experience team, National Suicide Prevention Alliance. They do so well because of the support that they give to the people that volunteer for them. If it wasn't for that support, people wouldn't be able to do the jobs that it is that they do for them. Support, support, support.
As you were talking, David, you made me think of how often it seems like people in prison have felt very much excluded from society and not part of, and given the message that they don't belong, which starts perhaps with, how they're treated in their families quite often, but also the exclusion from the school system. And as you were talking, you just had this real sense of how included you are within society in very many ways, and you've made sure that as part of that you also play a role contributing something that's really valuable to society, but that belonging really comes through from how you speak about what you do.
Yeah, you do. I mean, sexually abused, kicked out of class, suspended, excluded from a pupil referral unit, then put into care of the local authority, just excluded. And then when you're in prison, in the eyes of most society, prison exists outside of society. When it doesn't, it's very much in society. And I do feel very much part of society. But one of the best bits of advice I ever received was don't apologize for having a voice and don't apologize for having lived experience. And as much as I do feel included, I don't think anyone will now be able to kind of push me back out again by beating me up with the stigma discrimination stuff. I don't feel as much. Well, no, I don't really feel any stigma discrimination these days. I'm proud of having lived experience. I'm not proud of the things I did, and I apologize to any victims over my life that have been created, but I'm proud of having lived experience, and I'm proud of having a voice, and I am so thankful to people like yourselves, Revolving Doors, the NHS, whoever, for providing a platform for people with lived experience. Because something I do say is that, great, I've got the voice, great, I've got lived experience, but if I didn't have a platform, I'd be speaking to a brick wall. So as much as people sometimes are so grateful you come here, so thankful for you to use your lived experience, I'm just as grateful for the platform, because it's these platforms where people will listen, and hopefully we can begin to change the way people think. For real change to happen, you first have to change the way people think.
For coming on and sharing your story, David. Really
Thank you, David, and thank you, Naomi. Brilliant, loved it.